instead of fear being something that should kind of be like left alone and ignored, like how we're the type of people where it kind of pushes us into more action. Like I know I've learned that about myself a lot over the last couple of years, is like when I'm scared of something, that's the quickest way to get me into, something productive, because the last thing you want to be is just complacent, right? Like you said too, is you don't want to get into that place of just kind of getting by. And, if I'm in a place where nothing's scaring me, then what's pushing me, to do things? And that's kind of how I've always been as well, is like, why train so hard in the gym? Well, you're scared of getting knocked out. You're scared of getting beat up. So it kind of always, in a way, you could argue, stems from, fear. Like action kind of has to stem from that fear.
Welcome back, Dylan. Nice to have you here today. It's been a while since we've chatted. Thank you for joining us to talk a little bit more about how we can actually focus in on fear, a really big topic of conversation for a lot of coaches, for a lot of athletes out there, and how they manage fear, and how today, we can talk a little bit about how to take fear and actually use it as a prompt and to use it as leverage. So thank you for joining us. You were in Tae Kwon Do, and then you went from Tae Kwon Do to MMA.
Yeah.
And I remember having a conversation with you, and you were like, I'm getting beaten up.
Yeah.
You said something to that effect. And you went from you're winning, you're the champ, the best in not this club, but this city or whatever, this, nationally, internationally, to you're getting the floor wiped with you.
Yeah.
And you said something about what got me was you were like you liked it. And I was like, well, that's interesting. Why would, it's rare, because a lot of times people who are at the top of their game somewhere, there's this feeling, don't you feel that I can't not be good at something.
Yeah.
And when they're not good at something, they just drop it right away, because they have to have this feeling that, no, I'm at the top of the game. And I feel like that's like a real form of insecurity, actually, if you ask me. That while they're at the top, they're still insecure. They have to feel like they're the best. And it's an insecurity that they have. You sought out moments where you're like the worst in the group. And you're like, I'm enjoying it. Explain that. I don't get it.
It's a good question. I think for me, I think when you go through a journey where you start off like very beginner level, and then, I wasn't naturally gifted in many ways when it came to fighting, and I kind of worked myself to getting from a place of being, like you said, the worst in the gym to not only the best in the club, but the best out there.
Right.
Going through a journey like that, how can I be scared of being bad in something else? Because I know that, I've done it before in other things, right? So the ingredients are there. I just know that maybe the recipe is different this time around. It's a different thing I'm looking to make, but I know that I have it in me too, if I wanted to fully commit to something, take it as far as I want to. And I think that's why it's less daunting, because I know, hey, it might suck now, but give it enough time. If I really want to do it this way, I can get there. And then at the same time, there's a nice feeling about learning again, not just being at the top and just kind of not coasting, but really thinking about high level, small differences, and then having to be a beginner and just start fresh at the drawing board and be completely new at something. There's something interesting about figuring out those bigger problems that haven't had to be figured out in a while.
Yeah, that's what struck me as interesting, because like you said, even when you went through the Tae Kwon Do journey, you had to figure it out. You weren't necessarily the best the first day that you came in. And that's what I was curious about. I was like, you've already been through this once. Why are you doing this to yourself again? So when you were going into MMA, were you doing it because you were like, I need something to challenge me? Or were you you knew you were going to be at the bottom of this thing? So there's a difference. This time you're going in, you almost, like you said, you had an agenda, right? And you actually sought out a moment where you're at the bottom of the back of the pack. Whereas a lot of people find themselves at the back of the pack without the agenda to get in, to go to the back of the pack. Everybody's looking for getting to the front of the pack. The agenda is to get to the front of the pack. Your agenda was to get to find something where you were the back of the pack and then work your way forward. Whereas people find themselves at the back of the pack without that agenda to get there, and they're like, this sucks. Whereas you're like, no, here's what I get out of being at the back of the pack. What were those things when you moved from one sort of art to MMA and you found yourself, what were those when you say high level things? What were the things that you were searching for that you would gain by being at the back of the pack?
Yeah, it's a good question. Like, again, I don't know if I was deliberately seeking out something that I knew would be like a totally different challenge, or else I probably would have done something aside from martial arts. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but you learned quickly that, oh gosh, these guys are way better.
Oh yeah, way different. I think growing up, like, as a fan of MMA and UFC and stuff like that, it was always something I wanted to do. And as I, fought for years and years in Tae Kwon Do, and I was kind of becoming a little bit less satisfied with it, the things that were bothering me about the sport were things I knew I could find in something like MMA with the, kind of full contact, a little bit more freedom with what you could do. You could take people down, you could punch, like all those other things. So for me, it was almost like worth being at the bottom, knowing that the results of climbing my way up, like the quality that comes from that, would be so much more gratifying too. So it was almost taking some of the ingredients that I had and knowing, hey, like, some of this stuff will translate really well. A lot of this probably won't translate at all, but let me see kind of what I can do. So it was this interesting thing of like, kind of like half being at the bottom, because it wasn't the same as starting off with like no experience in martial arts at all. But at the same time, it's tricky because it's almost tougher to go into something where you're like half good at it. Because like little things, like there was a sliver of it that I could do really well, which is the kicks and the movement and the timing and stuff like that. But then there's a whole world of things that I just really had to figure out for the first time. So I think rather than just going into something completely blind, having a little bit of expertise in like a slim part of a bigger picture made it tough to navigate as well. It's like, okay, there's things I'm really good at. There's things I'm really bad at. Like, I had to selflessly, I guess, not do the things I was really good at and do more of the things I knew I had to learn. Like, if I was, let's say, sparring, I could keep my distance and throw some kicks, and like that would make me feel good from like an ego perspective. And there were times where I definitely started doing that because I'm like, okay, I don't want these people to think I'm just, whatever. I want to show them that like I know what I'm doing. But then exactly, but then what am I learning, right? Like, I had one of the coaches too pull me aside and say, well, we know you can do that. You know you can do that. Try the other stuff. And I was like, you know what? You're right. Like, let me put that to the side, build up the rest of it.
So even you started initially, and you can't help it because you got to lean on your strengths. You want to be able to compete. But even you stayed away from, let's just call it, the areas of improvement because you were staying in the areas that you were comfortable. It's so natural. It's natural to do that until a coach comes along and tells you, take some chances here. It's going to hurt at first. And so you did that. Were there things, do you recall? I mean, it's not too long ago too. I mean, it's maybe... Yeah, not too long ago. Do you remember things that you really found hard just to still and struggle with anything? Like that was really, that you couldn't pick up, like relative to the rest of the group? Yeah. You were, what was there anything like that? I would say less from a striking. I would say jiu-jitsu is like a very tough martial art, especially, and what I found kind of my challenge with it is it's not a linear process of learning the way that striking is, right? Like, for example, I mean, obviously, the way Tae Kwon Do works is you learn, you bend your knee, you turn your foot, you extend, and then you can turn that one kick into a combination of kicks. And it's very like A to B to C. And like, that was how I was conditioned to like learn things. There's step one, there's step two, there's step three. Whereas jiu-jitsu, it's someone explained it to me, it's like a branch of things. Like, you learn one thing and it opens up a whole branch of other things. So you go from one class to the next and they're not building on what you learned the last time. They're just showing you different moves, and it's kind of your job to put those pieces together and figure out kind of how to make it work. And for me, having so many years in a martial art that was very linear, like, this is the step, this is the combination, two things equal this thing. You start here, you stop here. Exactly. To go into something so fluid and so like, okay, I need to like remember this and like do it on my own and whatever, like that was definitely a challenge, because I was like almost waiting on the step-by-step instructions instead of just being present and being like, well, if I just go to every class, I'll figure it out eventually. And so eventually you say that you were able to kind of get comfortable and you grew out of that, and you that sort of area of weakness, you strengthened it, right? Were there areas that you were just like, why can't I get this?
Yeah.
Like,
Still, honestly, even with that same kind of like jujitsu pathway, like, I just stopped. Like, I wasn't able to do it consistently. And that's something I've learned about myself that I struggle with a lot is I'm like really all or nothing. Like,
yes,
for me, if I'm doing something,
yeah,
I want to be like the best. I want to go like every single day, or I'm like doing something completely different. It's tough for me to like ease my way into things and be like, let me go twice a week. Because for me, it's like, well, that's not going to get me like where I want to be. I need to go twice a day, right? But it's not realistic. And then when I can't kind of get to that level, I'm like, okay, this isn't working. Like, what else can I do? So even something like that, it's not something I was able to figure out because I wasn't able to go as consistently as I guess I would have wanted to. And something like that, I mean, you have to go like at least a couple times a week just to like figure it out.
Sure.
Where I was kind of like, well, if I've only got an hour, a couple hours throughout the week, I'd rather do like the Muay Thai training and stuff that I know I can spar and be a little bit better at. So I kind of had to make the choice to go that route as well. But again, that's something that I kind of learned about myself, which I already knew, but I was more challenged recently because I didn't have as much time to give into what I wanted to do, like passion-wise, is I have to find a little bit more balance of doing what works instead of what in my mind I think is like the best way to do it, because that's not always the realistic way.
So that's interesting, right? Because now circumstance, doesn't permit you to go twice a day, let's just say. Maybe that's circumstance. And because of that, now you're not going to get that result that you're used to seeing constantly. And that leads to a decline in the morale level to even pursue it further and give up on something. And I think that's where, like, I think even as we get older, even as as an athlete or whatever, you just can't do the stuff that you could do, or you struggle with something that you're like, I shouldn't struggle with anything. There's nothing I've ever struggled with. A lot of people, like say myself, who would look at you from the outside, you never look like you struggled with anything. And it just seemed like it just came to you. But a lot of people don't appreciate just how much effort that has to go into it. Like you talked about, 2 times a day, not 2 times a week. And still till today, Master Faraz talks about how you get out of it what you put into it. But sometimes you put something in and you're just not getting the results back. Right? Was there something like that where you were putting in the effort? It wasn't that you didn't have time. You were putting in the effort, but you're just not getting Dylan-like results anymore. And it starts to make you question yourself. Like, wait a second, am I even Dylan? Since we've talked and since you've gone through this, have you experienced anything like that in this part of your journey?
I think for me, again, it's less now about being able to put 100% into something and then being frustrated by not seeing the results. What frustrates me is kind of the opposite, which is like not being able to put 100% into something. And that's, why I, stopped competing when I did, back in the day, was like, I'm not at a place anymore where I can fully do it. And if I can't fully do it, I don't deserve then kind of the success that my dreams would be to kind of not be in it. So there's a ton of things, and there's always opportunities that come up. So I'm like, man, I would love to do something like that. But I know in the back of my head, and it's frustrating, like, but it would take something from me that I just can't give right now, right? Like I was talking to a friend the other day who I know from Tae Kwon Do. He was on the national team too. And I was talking to him about the same thing, because I know he owns his own Tae Kwon Do school, but he trains in other things like jiu-jitsu, Muay Thai, whatever. And I was telling him, like, that's what frustrates me, is doing something that I know if I put everything into it, I could be really good, but just not, being able to. And he kind of told me, like, well, what he does is he just lowers his expectations. He's like, I have no desire to compete. Like, he's a little bit older than me.
Yeah.
He's like, I don't want to compete. Like, I've already done that. I've done that whole thing. Now I just want to like learn, and I just want to train to train. And for me, like, I'm so far from like where I used to be, where that was my mindset. And now it's everything has to be like goal oriented, right? Like if I'm doing this, it's for this bigger thing. And I think I've lost track of there's just a beauty in like training to train. Because for me, going back to the whole kind of OCD, like I need to do it perfectly. It's
right.
Well, what's the point of me training a little bit if I know that if I put everything into it, I could be like a champion again. And it's like, well, that's just not where I'm at right now. And I don't even want to, because I have other things that, you know, kind of demand my time. But is it worth not doing it all together and missing out on the lessons along the way, which ultimately are the more important ones than a belt or a trophy in your hands?
That's interesting that you say that, because we live in a world, especially when you're competing, where, you know, when you get to that top of that podium and you get the goals, you hit the goals, you're driven by, there's this singular focus. There's, let's just call it purpose. And if there's no purpose, then what's the point?
Mm-hmm.
You can't just be floating around there, Dylan, out here. Like, you say that to yourself at some point, that what's the point of all this? And at that moment, when there isn't that goal, there isn't, like you started saying it yourself right now, where you're like, oh no, like you talk about the success in the journey itself, right? But that doesn't happen just like that. There's a transition moment between, wait, I don't have a goal. What's the goal? So when you started getting to that point, when you started experiencing that I can't hit these goals because of whatever circumstance, I've got to change how I'm looking at it. What did that, did you just accept it that, oh my gosh, now, like, was this feeling of like, I'm not the person I used to be? So you're settling for a lesser version of yourself? Is that how it looks at first?
Yeah, I don't know. I think for me, it's tough too, because I'm younger, right? And I almost feel like there's so much ahead of me, right? If I wanted to, and it always goes back, if I wanted to, but again, I think it's changing the goal from doing one thing and putting everything into that one thing, and going back to just wanting to be like the best version of myself that I can be. And I think that that's one thing that kind of helps me be a little bit more balanced, is it's like, I'm not going to the gym to be like, you know, a professional weightlifter, but it helps me be more energized. It helps me be a little bit more focused. It helps me be more in shape. So it's like looking at the other things kind of in the background that it helps with, as opposed to like, well, what if I did this thing professionally?
But don't tell me you didn't notice when you were going through this change here that the guys that are now people ahead of you, because they either had the time or whatever, and they were focusing, and they're there and they're like crushing it in the gym or at Muay Thai or at Jiu-Jitsu, and you're like feeling this feeling of being left behind, like losing ground. You ever feel that?
Yeah, I think for me, one thing that I've noticed a lot ever since I stopped competing too is this almost fear of like being normal. You know, I think there's a lot of athletes that I talk to are like that as well, which is like the identity crisis you kind of go through, where it's like, well, if I'm not Dylan, the fighter and the national team and whatever, like, you know, what am I left with, right? And there's this fear of like just being average. And I think too, that's, you know, to your point of when you're doing something,
everyone else,
yeah,
right? But
when you're doing something normally, I guess, at like a normal pace, and you see other people excelling, and you're kind of, again, like you said, not moving along at that same pace, it's kind of like, well, you know, does that just make me like one of the regular group? You know what I mean? Instead of like the high performance.
Yeah,
it is a changing of the priorities. I guess it has to be more of like internalizing the fact that that's not, you know, the value doesn't come from being a high performance athlete anymore. The value just comes from, I guess, the lessons you learn as you do things. But it wasn't easy. Like, it took me a long time.
Come on, there's a, let's just call it a high or something that you feel. Like the other day, I pulled my back or something, and I couldn't play something for 3-4 days, and then I thought to myself, oh my gosh. And someone said, hey, you're just getting older. Yeah, relax. And I was thinking, no. I don't want to go out like this. Just bury me now. I don't want to go through this whole like where I'm sitting and finally fading away. I just want it to end right here. I don't want to experience that. And I feel like that must be even harder for guys that are way ahead to sort of like feel like this, like you're slowly losing ground. And it's depressing actually a little bit. You don't automatically say, well, yeah, I'm just going to enjoy the journey and I'm going to learn from that. Right?
Yeah. No, it's tough. It's tough. Like, there's a lot of, like you said before, you're able to kind of rationalize like the positive side of it. You have to first come to terms with like, there's something here that sucks. You know what I mean? Like there's times, I mean, there'll be like
It
big
does suck.
Tae Kwon Do competitions that are televised, and I'll watch it with, either by myself or I'll share some clips with my old teammates or whatever. And there's for sure, times where I'm like, man, these people are at the top, like, come on, exactly too. Yeah. So it is tough. And before you can, I guess, find like the optimistic kind of side of the whole thing, like you are kind of faced with that part of it that just sucks. And then you have to figure out like, what do I do with this? Because if I just kind of sit in this feeling, I'm not going to be any fun. That's for sure.
I think one of the things that I've always told you, I think that makes you special is that you're one of the people who I find is the quickest of the ones that I know out there we talked about turning fault or falls into leverage. You find ways to very quickly use that as leverage. I think that's what I admire probably about you the most, that you're quick to turn it to leverage. And what I really would love to understand with you is that although it happens for you for a short bit of time, it does happen. And for different people, it's different times that it takes. A lot of people, I feel, want to shorten the amount of time that it takes, right, to turn it into leverage. Mm-hmm. So I guess my thought is that, A, does it happen as frequently for you as it does for others is one thing that I'm curious about. Fall downs take place a lot for me, a lot for people out there, but we stay fallen, let's just say. We cry over that spilt milk. The water doesn't get under that bridge so quickly for us. Whereas for you, you're like water on the bridge, or you're like, yeah, what am I going to do about this? You process that very, very quickly, I notice. But it still happens for you. Mm-hmm. And what I'm wondering is that, are there times you're older now. You're not going to be that's because you just can't put in the time. Life is happening, right? Do you still use the same strategy? Do you feel like you're able to leverage things as quickly still, or is it starting to take a little bit longer for you to go, oh man, that adjustment didn't just happen like that. You just, for example, you moved somewhere and then you moved back. Before it's like, if you want something to happen, it happens. Mm-hmm. Now it's starting to take longer to happen. Do you notice that?
Yeah. I think for me, like the reason why I can do that so quickly, and it's not a natural thing. It's not like, I was just born with this like ability to be optimistic. I think it's just a repetitions thing. I think, by default, we're kind of hardwired to worry about.
So you weren't always like this?
No, not at all.
Come on, that's the only way I know you.
No, and again, like I said, it was like years and years and years of consciously and subconsciously, mostly subconsciously, like just getting those repetitions in until the point where my kind of like path of least resistance, like the way that my brain works, just kind of takes me there first.
Right.
But it wasn't always like that. And it actually started like my ability to, I guess, self-talk my way into a negative to a positive came from being really anxious, like as a kid. Like I would worry about everything. Like I remember one of my earliest memories of this too was like being on the, track and field team, and I was like elementary school.
Yeah.
And I used to like anything that I couldn't control, I was like the first one to worry about it. Like, anything. And I remember the coach that was supposed to meet us at the school was like late. And my way of, because again, I was like really anxious and my mind was spinning, and the only way for me to kind of like calm myself down was I would just like tell myself these lies of like, well, maybe he's late because he went to like stop for coffee, and if he has his coffee, he'll be a little bit more like energized, and then like I'll get more out of him because he's better this way. So it was my way of like justifying like the unjustifiable, which is the reality is he's just late.
Right.
But my back end defense mechanism to like make myself feel better was, well, I would tell myself this story. Well, maybe he slept in, but maybe he needed it because he would have been too tired. And right. So it really started from a place of me being so anxious that I had to like tell myself these stories of how it actually works out better because of that. And, that was at, I don't know, 7, 8 years old. So from there,
you're gonna trick yourself.
Exactly. And then over time, it's become kind of my default of as soon as something bad happens, I go right into now, all these years later, of it just kind of spiders out of like all the different things that could be good that kind of come from that thing. So again, it didn't just start as me just being this like positivity guy. It became, I was actually very like worried and anxious, and any little thing that could go wrong would freak me out. So it was this defense mechanism of trying to tell myself a story about how it would be kind of better.
Yeah.
And then over time, like you just like anything, you get your reps in like over and over and over again, thousands of times. Now it's become more authentic, and I'm able to kind of put the pieces together quicker. And as soon as something happens, I kind of quickly go into the, okay, but this is why it's better. But still, like, that still stems from the anxiety around it, right? It's not just like because it's fun to be positive, is because if I'm not thinking about that, then I'm going to be worried about like what the back end result of this could be if it goes wrong. So it's still, I think, driven by that insecurity of, if I just leave this, maybe it's just a bad thing. It's like convincing myself that there's good things to come out of it. But, the cool thing is that most of the time, like, that's how things do work.
So that part of that anxiety is still active.
Mm-hmm.
It's still there.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I'm constantly worried.
You still worry, but you just get you're quicker to turn that worry into something else.
Yeah. Well, if I wasn't worried about something, then I wouldn't have that. I wouldn't have anything to turn into something.
That's the
being
prompt.
positive. You know what I mean?
That's
like
the prompt.
Exactly. And like whether it's things that push or be scared, like even now I just moved back to Toronto from Ottawa again,
right.
Like different city, like rent is crazy expensive and all that. And again, like there's those fears.
Like
factors.
if there wasn't gravity, our legs would be weak.
Yeah. The fear factors kick in. Yeah. And for me, again, it's okay, but this is going to push me to work harder. It's better network, whatever. So, but it's not just isolated kind of optimism. Like it stems from that kind of gut punch of, okay, I'm scared of, X, Y, Z. And then my next response is not like an instantaneous thing, but it's pretty close. That's when my next response is, okay, I can dwell on this, or I can just think about, the multiple ways in which this is better, focus on those things. And like I said, more often than not, it does work out to be something better.
What did you notice before you started doing this? Self-talking yourself in a positive way.
Mm-hmm.
Like you said, it didn't, that's not where you started. That's somewhere around the middle to the end. What was happening, did you notice, when you weren't doing that? Because you weren't at some point.
Mm-hmm. I just wasn't able to focus properly. I remember my very first Tae Kwon Do tournament with Authentic. I remember we were driving in the car. We were going to Waterloo. The tournament was in Waterloo, and my mom had made me double check all my gear before we left. And I was like, yeah, I got it. And then I realized kind of halfway through, like my chest, I didn't bring my chest protector, which is like the biggest thing you need, right? Yeah. So I'm like, oh my God, and I'm freaking out, and she's freaking out. Like I definitely got my like anxiety tendencies from her. So we're both freaking out. And then, so we call Master Farah, and we were kind of like frantic, like, oh my God, Dylan forgot his chest protector. What are we going to do? And he's like, it's fine. Yeah. Like, we'll just borrow from somebody. Like one of the teammates is there, we'll just borrow. And it was like, okay. So we just went, and I just borrowed a chest protector from one of my teammates that was there, and it was fine. But again, to be left in that kind of high anxiety, like big worry, without having something to fix it or like resolve that feeling, it's just like, it's distracting. It starts to focus on the task at hand because, your mind starts to wander into all these different reasons of why it could go wrong. So it's hard to be in the neutral space. I find, at least for me, it's either things are going wrong and that's the spiral, or this can turn into something great and I force myself to kind of spiral upwards. I think it's tough to kind of just be neutral and like not think of it at all. I
was with someone the other day, and they said, we were looking at a situation. They said, what's the best that can happen? And I was expecting, when they first started, I was expecting to say, what's the worst that can happen? And then we plan from the worst to try and make the worst case better. But she automatically went to, what's the best that can happen? And in just a moment, we started on the other side of the situation. And I was like, I got to do this more often. Mm-hmm. What's the best that can happen? Start there and stay focused there. But quite often, I think we live in I don't know where we learned this from, but like you said, you learned it somewhere, mm-hmm. right? It's like, what's the worst that can happen? Oh no, if you don't have your chest protector, it's the end of the world.
Yeah.
Well, you can always borrow one, right? But we stay there in like you said, and we spiral. And so it's happened to you regularly in the past. Recently, have you found yourself that you're now, like you said, you're solving for it, but it's not solving. Like it's not. You're trying to fix it in your head. You fixed it, like like you go there pretty quick.
Yeah.
You solve for things and you try to check. Okay, got it. Okay, we're on our way now, right? Like you get this. You start building momentum in that direction. Have you noticed at times, Dylan, that you're trying? You're just trying, but you're not building the momentum towards something. You feel you're not spiraling down because you're not being negative. You're being positive, but the change is not taking place.
Mm-hmm.
Have you noticed that happening? Either for you, you coach people, you notice it happening for them, they're not getting the results.
Yeah.
That's really frustrating.
It's frustrating because, there's only so much you can do in a short amount of time and see like the results that you're probably looking for that take a little bit longer of a time. And there's a big trust factor, right? So it's how do you convince yourself of something that you're not going to see right away? And I think that's the problem too, is now,
it didn't show up on time.
Yeah, especially now, everything nowadays is very like instantaneous. You want something, it's very quick to be able to go out and get it. Stuff like this, you have to reserve that a little bit. You have to go, it might not happen now. It might not happen in a month or a year, whatever. Like you have no idea. So that's the tricky part too, is it's like this.
That leads to anxiety, don't you feel?
Yeah, it's like the thing that I'm saying is the positive kind of next step. Who knows when that's going to happen? There's nothing, you can't look out and reach out and kind of grab it. You're just kind of trusting. And I think that's what makes it tough as well. A lot of
100%.
It's like you're kind of just hoping for it.
Yeah.
But the negative seems a lot more real than, you can kind of really see it behind you creeping in than this kind of positive spin that who knows when it's going to happen, if at all. So
right.
The challenge is, I guess, just trusting that process. And, for me, I guess one of the reasons why I'm able to trust that process a little bit better is because it's easier to look back and notice times it's happened before instead of just look forward. So what I mean is, like, when you say, and people say this all the time, everything happens for a reason, right?
Okay.
And I've gotten into debates with my friends too over this. Exactly. It's like, well, how do you know? It's just something to say, right? For me, I'm a big believer in that, but it's a valid point. It's like, well, how do you know? And how do you know it's not just something that you say to make you feel better? It's like, well, at least again, my way of thinking about it is, how many things can you look back on from the past? I mean, even for you, how many things have happened over the years that in the moment felt like either the end of the world or even just on a lower spectrum, just something that was just no good. And it just felt like a loss, or it felt like something bad, that looking back on it now, all these years later with your insights, you can kind of look back and go, well, in the moment, it felt really bad and I was scared and I was anxious and whatever. But if that didn't happen, well, it wouldn't have led to this and that other thing. And now I'm actually kind of glad it did, because for something that felt so gut-wrenching in the moment, kind of became the thing that led me to better things, right?
So I'm going to challenge you on that.
Yeah.
It's called hindsight, right? And it's 2020, because now you can connect what happened. Although, by the way, what happened, it was just one possibility. It could have gone wrong. It could have done so many things. There could have been luck involved. So, but today's circumstance, the issue with today's circumstance is, I find, and I've gone through this, and a lot of people go through this, I think, is it's not the same. The circumstances are different. So when you, exactly. When you say, hey, look back on a time when you struggled, you thought, I've said the same thing too. But this is not the same circumstance. So now what?
It's possible. You know what I mean? And I guess for me, the way I take it is, if you're going to be biased, I would rather choose the bias that kind of fulfills what I want more. Like I don't think there's a way to be completely objective in anything, right? So like you said,
delusional. You're dreaming.
You're
being unrealistic.
The difference for me is the fact, I guess, and again, this is just my take on it, but the reason I kind of have that more grounded than it being just delusional is because you can look back and see it's anchored in reality, right? Even though it's past, and like you said, it's hindsight, you could have connected those dots to kind of serve that purpose. You could say, well, you purposely connected those dots to prove your point, but again, there were negative things that came from it that you didn't acknowledge. I guess my take is, listen, if I'm gonna be biased a little bit, which I don't know if anyone can totally shake, I'd rather my bias be self-fulfilling. I'd rather my bias be a little bit more encouraging. to help me get through whatever this thing is than to be a realist. And at the end of the day, even realists are going to be clouded by their own judgment at that point as well, preventing them from taking those next steps. So yeah, you could connect those dots, I guess, any way you want to tell the story you want to tell.
Right.
If I'm in a moment where I need some of that reassurance, I'm in a moment where I do feel scared and anxious and nervous, and I need some sort of, encouragement that can't just come from somebody else, has to be authentic.
Yes.
I'll connect those dots in a way that reminds me like, well, that bad thing led to other good things. So what makes this current bad thing any different? And it's, I guess, my strategy, again, going back to that whole stemming from the anxiety to turn it into something purposefully, as opposed to it being just, oh, naturally, I just think this way and I've always thought this way. It's just not the case.
I think that I think is really empowering. A lot of times you're a coach, coaches are needed. Like, that's exactly the purpose of the coach sometimes. It's like, literally, you're like, oh, I didn't just make you taller or faster. You didn't gain or shed. You're the same person. All the changes, I said something to you, right? And there they are. But that's a big thing. When we don't have that coach present, we got to be our own kind of coach, right? And this is how to coach ourselves. At the end of the day, that's the role of the coach, right? To sometimes say to us sometimes that something that we don't even see in ourselves, they saw it. But when that coach is not present, how do we self-coach, right? We call it self-talk. It is self-coaching. And, I've heard sometimes people, one of my favorites is, it's not that we aim too high and we miss the target, but that we aim too low and we hit the target.
Yep.
So like you said, I wonder if that's, you referred to it as bias right now, that if I'm going to be biased, why don't I bias myself to a higher target than bias myself to a lower target? Because we're likely going to fulfill our what we envision. And that's very true for many people, no matter what they think their level of power is, right? So I like how you said that. You call it a bias. And I love that you also acknowledge that who's actually 1,000% objective.
Mm-hmm.
If you're going to be biased, at least be biased this way.
Yep.
But even for those who, and I think that's really a very consistent pattern with you that I noticed, that I think is amazing. Like, it's almost like some people think that you're not acknowledging the other side, but you are acknowledging the other side. You know that it's a real possibility that it's there. So there is still that fear in that moment still. Does it ever really go away?
I don't think it can. I mean, you can't, it's kind of this funny thing, right? Like, the more you try to plug your ears and block things out, like the stronger they're going to get, right? You can't just pretend something doesn't exist and have it go away. That's how things get bigger, right? So it's really about acknowledging it first to make it a little bit less scary, because something you acknowledge is going to be a little bit less scary than something you don't acknowledge. So
give me an example of when it happened to you.
So
when you acknowledge something that you're afraid of and it became less scary, how's that possible? Like,
yeah, like, even I'm trying to think, like, during COVID, like, things were shut down. At the time, I was kind of juggling a bunch of things. I was working at a restaurant. I was, trying to run MindLock this a few years ago, and there was times where it was just everything was shut down, right?
Yeah.
And, there were moments where I was like, I remember there was a second kind of lockdown, even the third. It wasn't the main one. It was like one of the bumps they did. It was just for January. It was like just a January thing. And I remember, like, they told us that, like, everything was going to be shut down for January. And I was like, well, okay, I'm kind of screwed now, because I know that, like, most of my income is coming from the restaurant. This is going to be shut down. I have to figure something out, because if I just do nothing and, like, sit on my hands and accept it, like, I'm going to be in a pretty bad situation. So the first thing was actually just, like, again, recognizing that to myself and not just saying, oh, it's a bad thought. I'm not going to think about that right now. I'm not going to think about it. Because if you're not thinking about it, you can't solve it, right? So kind of taking that from the shadows and bringing it up and saying, okay, I see this. Like, I'm less scared because I'm thinking about it, I'm talking about it, whatever. And then turning that into some sort of problem solving around, okay, here's what I can do about that within the things I can control. And then going and tackling that head on. But that's an example, again, of if I had just buried that because it's a bad thought, it's negative, I wouldn't have given myself any way to get out of it.
Yeah.
Right? So I think sometimes too, you have to, like, really figure out what's the thing that scares you and, like, look at it head on, because even, taking it out of, this context and putting it into even just fighting and competing, you're going to have to fight the person. Like, it doesn't matter how big and tall and scary they are and how experienced they are. Like, you're going to have to fight them. So if you just close your eyes the whole time and you just kind of open your eyes when it's time to fight, that's worse because you're just seeing them for the first time. If you watch the film and you prepare a little bit, it's nerve-wracking to watch them do their thing maybe, but then by the time it comes to facing them in the ring, I've seen it before, I'm less scared because I've exposed myself to it, right? So I think if you just close your eyes and block your ears and expect things to go away, they're just going to get bigger and bigger until you just never want to open your eyes again because it's too much.
I think it's profound. Like, you become desensitized by just looking at it just more.
Mm-hmm.
It just becomes more normal because it's just more present now. Yeah, I really like that. That as a fighter, you can say that that's what you faced with a person, but in life, it's very transferable. That it happens, and it happens when you talk about going from being a fighter to making rent, to having enough money to put food on the table, to building your business. I think that all kind of like plays in. So I really, really appreciate that. Again, you take the time to come out and to talk through these things with you, because every time I think we talk, it's another phase, right? That you're experiencing. There was that whole transition from, Tae Kwon Do to thing. And then now there's, I think, like in these other phases, even as a coach right now, as you go through more and more of it, you are helping others. They may come this time that you tried to help somebody and then you couldn't. And then there'll be that and working through that and what you learn through it. So those obstacles, not that I would wish that sort of, not failure, but fall on anybody. But it's through those that really you just come out even more developed.
Yeah. We're talking about...
Yeah, what are you looking forward to next?
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about that before too, right? About how, instead of fear being something that should kind of be like left alone and ignored, like how we're the type of people where it kind of pushes us into more action. Like, I know I've learned that about myself a lot over the last couple of years, is like when I'm scared of something, that's the quickest way to get me into, something productive, because the last thing you want to be is just complacent, right? Like you said too, is you don't want to get into that place of just kind of getting by. And, if I'm in a place where nothing's scaring me, then, well, what's kind of pushing me, to do things? And that's kind of how I've always been as well, is like, why train so hard in the gym? Well, you're scared of getting knocked out. You're scared of getting beat up. So it kind of always, in a way, you could argue, stems from, fear. Like, action kind of has to stem from that fear. I remember, Master Pharaoh was telling us there was one time after class, he wanted us all to get like training journals, right? And it's funny because I do this now with all my athletes. I get everybody to journal, but he wanted us to just write stuff down after practice. And, I think for all of us, we were kind of like, yeah, it's a cool concept, I guess. But the reason why I did it was because I was scared of what would happen if next week when he asked to see them, I didn't have one, right? So anyway, long story short, I was the only one that got one and did it, and it was something I stuck with for like years and years after. It was one of the most beneficial tools I had, but it didn't stem from my own insight of like, this is a good thing. I was more just like, well, I'll get it because I don't want to deal with what's going to happen when he tells me, hey, let's see it, and I don't have one, right? So
yeah, I totally agree. I think fear, I always say, like, fear, it's not fear that's the problem. It's the despair and the paralysis of going into that mode, which is the problem. But I love how you focus on fear, and you use fear as leverage. You use fear as the prompt, and that it's more of a beginning rather than an end to things. So I really appreciate that you taking the time. Every time we get together, we chat, there's something else that comes out of it for me, and that's probably like the biggest highlight of today's conversation, really, that I really appreciate you for. So thank you for coming out today, man.
Thanks, man. This is great. Like always, I like the ambiance.
It's amazing how time just flies when I'm sitting here talking to you about something, and I was thinking I'll talk to you about something completely different. And when you got into this and you were talking about it, I thought I really loved the explanation. I think it's very helpful for many of us that are facing like any kind of fear, and instead of looking at it and saying, hey, it's a fear, looking at it as saying it's a prompt changes the game.
Yeah, like you said too, it's the first step. It's not the alternate kind of bad thing that can happen. It's kind of the first thing that propels you into action. And sometimes you need a little bit of that, you know, kick in the pants to move forward. And like, I know I'm that type of way too. So again, it's not like fear is bad, confidence is good. It's kind of this, they're all kind of blended together. You know, everyone uses different things to motivate them. And sometimes the thing that scares you the most is going to be the best thing for you to kind of push forward as well. Because without that, you'll just kind of settle in that kind of mediocrity realm where everything's just kind of even.
And nobody wants to be that.
You want to be, you don't want to
fall back. You want to be something.
Yeah.
So when it comes along, it's nature's way or whatever of like just saying, we're not gonna let you be something. You're gonna be something. Yeah, that's amazing, man. Thank you so much again. I appreciate you coming out.
Thank you.
I feel like even when you were talking about it earlier, this feeling that like, especially like high performing athletes, there is this feeling that you are ahead of the pack. And there is definitely a feeling when we start falling further and further back from the lead, we notice ourselves falling back into average, and it is scary as hell because it's like my life is over. Like, what's the point of getting up in the morning anymore if I can't be this? It might as well not happen. And then there's this new appreciation for, yeah, that wasn't the why, and the why changes. And you touched on that a little bit, but again, you go through it so quickly that you're like, yeah, you know what? I mean, just appreciate the journey.
Yeah,
it's like, wait a second. Actually, it's not that quick for most people. For most people, I know for me, it's been, fight to stay in the game, and it's like a fight to stay there, whereas your universe is trying to tell you there's something bigger. Let this go. And I didn't want to let it go. And it wasn't until very recently that I started to let go. That I'm not going to be the best at this. I'm not going to beat this guy. And my mind changed to something else happen. Like I remember like consciously, like I would look at another dude who I'm playing against, right? Usually younger, and I'd be like, I'm going to show him that I still got this.
Yeah.
And it gets worse, man, because you're like, you have to train so much harder. Like you're moving slower. You're not as flexible, and you find new ways to win. That's cool. But there comes a point, it actually becomes like resentment, right? Like, I'm better than you here, but you're winning, right? And then it went from, you know what, man? How about you just celebrate this guy? Because this guy's he's trying to make something too. And he's at the beginning of something. You at least had that, right? Why are you trying to deny him that? I was like, why are you trying to deny him that? How about you help this guy?
Yeah.
And then I started going to actually helping these guys. And then I was like, and all of a sudden I became really good at being able to get them further along. And that I was like, oh, I'm good at that. Like, I'm really good at that. And then it's like, wow, that's my bigger why. But it wasn't that easy, man. It was like, I want to stand on that stage. I want to win. And I discovered something in that.
Yeah. I mean, it's like the toughest thing to do sometimes is to be selfless. You know what I mean? Like everything is always about like wanting to figure out a way to be,
come on, they're cheering for you, man.
Be competitive.
Right? Yeah. Right. So to let go of that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's tough to not be competitive and to try to turn that that competitive edge into something else instead of just wanting to do the thing that you're doing. Like you said, like if you're playing in a sport against somebody, like trying to turn that into, okay, I've had my time, how can I help them, and like be a resource. Like it sounds great, but like it's so hard to do because there's always that one-to-one competition of, okay, but I'll be a resource after I beat him. Like,
yeah.
Let me beat him and then I'll show him how to do it, instead of like, man, like I don't want to just kind of lose this thing. So it's tough to try to find that balance and be a helper before you've kind of established like, okay, but I know what I'm doing.
Yeah, I think that's where it's like, that's what they talk about, like conquering like, what are you conquering? When you play that person, you beat them, you conquer them. But when you conquer yourself, that's the conquer, right? That's the, and I think that's what I've learned, that before it was about conquering them, like beating somebody else. It was relative to some other place. You're first compared to second and third in this pool. Whereas now it's become, I'm the only one in the pool. There is nothing else. It's me against me. And hey, I can still be competitive and I can compete all day long against myself now. And I'm trying to, like, all I'm doing is, instead of somebody else having to push me, I'm pushing me. And I was like, wow, that's a great way for me to use this.
Yeah.
And I can use this in so many ways, but I'm starting to understand what they mean by, like, conquering yourself. I was like, I never worried about conquering myself. I was just worried about conquering everybody else. And then all of a sudden I was like, wow, what a risky proposition, that my value is based on relativity. And now it's not based on relativity.
That's what I was going to say too, is like that's the problem with making it about that, is that there's always going to be another person, right?
Yeah.
And you never get to the end of that pool. It's not like there's a finite amount of challengers.
Yeah.
And then once you go through everybody, like, you've done it. It's just a revolving door,
Never
right?
stop.
So you have to, like you said, you have to kind of change, the almost like criteria in which you're evaluating yourself, because if you're always evaluating yourself based off of, like, how you rank compared to the next person, there's always going to be the next person. There's only one of you. So it's better to kind of look at your trajectory over the course of your own time, as opposed to compared to the next person, because there's never going to stop being a next person.
Changing the criteria. That's our next topic.
There you go.
What do you say?
There you go. I'm here, man.
All right. We're going to do this. What's that? I mean, it's happened to me in every sport I've played. So it happened in soccer. It happened in basketball. It happened in Tae Kwon Do. Tae Kwon Do, my gosh, was maybe the hardest one, because when I was 18, that prime age, that's when I wrote about this as well. Master Farah made us write essays, right, as we got to different black belts tests, and that was my first essay, or my second essay, was I wrote about how in Taekwondo I rose, to a level. I was going to tournaments. I wasn't going to tournaments the way he was. I wasn't putting in the time the way he was. I was putting, the time that I put in got me great results. Like, I would win, but local tournaments. He went to national, international tournaments. But when I won, I was like, wow, yeah, like, okay, I'm great. I never actually had the thought that he had, which was, what's after this? I was like, no, I'm great. I made that decision there. And then I didn't train more because I was playing other sports. I was like, no, I'm competing well there and there and there. So it happened in all of these sports. And then what happened is life, right? He's like, pay rent, raise kids, so time went by. 20 years go by. And I send my son to Taekwondo because I'm like, hey, you should, learn this. And I meet Mr. Sumase. I don't know if you ever met Mr. Sumase, but he was my instructor. And he was training at Authentic.
Well,
and one day, I didn't even know he was there. I came back to pick up Tariq, and I was early, so I heard that there was a class going on upstairs, so I just went to go check it out. I was like, what's going on there? Like, oh, it's an adult class. Let me just go see. I'm waiting. Who do I see? Mr. Sumase from 20 years ago. And that's what brought me back. He's looking at me going, hey, rah. He's like, get in here. I'm like, sir, I'm wearing a suit. He goes, well, then come tomorrow. And like the way he would talk is like, just put on I go, I don't have just put on anything. So I put on like just jogging pants, track pants and a shirt. And Master Tom was there, who I used to train with back in the day.
Wow.
Yeah. So somebody else who I know, who I trained with, who I competed with, and he's in there. And so Master Sumase starts giving us targets, like kick, target. And I'm doing it. And I'm like loving it. And I feel the juice, right? And then I go home, and as I got out of the car, I pulled something. I was like, oh, what was that? And that's when I was like, yeah, you're not the same guy.
Yeah.
This 20 years has passed. So Master Farah says to me, he goes, so you want to come back? And I was like, no, I can't come back. It's like, no, I want to come back, but what's the point? I can't do what I was doing back then. So what's the point? So just come. And I go, okay, I'm thinking about it. And he goes, we'll start you at black belt. And I'm like, no, there is no way you can start me at black belt. You got to start me at white. I got to do this all over again. He goes, no. We'll start you here. And that was scary for me because I was like, you're not a black belt. There's no way.
Yeah.
At least what I thought a black belt was. And he goes, we'll just fast track you. And, the way Master Farrell looks at things is like, yes, it's not a problem. We'll just, we'll do this. I'm like, no. I worried. It's like, I got to do this right. And I remember what I could do, and I knew that I couldn't.
Yeah.
Still. And I didn't even know if I could get back to that again. And so for me, it was just that self-talk that I can't do this, and the injuries. And then I started getting my flexibility back, and then I did something that I never thought I could do. And I have to thank Master Bozart for this. I was getting ready for a black belt test, and my you have to do board breaks. So one of my board breaks, there has to be a power one, there has to be a combo one, and then there has to be a jumping one. So my jumping one was I was going to just, jump over like say 2 people or 3 people. I was like keeping it conservative. I know I can do 2 people. And she's like, she brings a chair, and she's like, here, just jump over this. And I was like, no, I can't jump over a chair. And she's like, so I remember that day till today where she's like, just jump over a chair. So and then I did. And not only did I jump over the chair, I managed to do the break as well. And I was like, holy crap, I can actually do this again. And so that was for second. And for third, I went for even more. It was like a person, and so I was like, oh my God, it can be done. But so for me, it was like not thinking I can, and then being able to again. But then I'm like, no, I know, sure. Like the body, the spring in the legs, it's just not the same no matter how. But I hired a trainer, and for my next test that I feel is coming up next, that to me is why I stay in there. Because it's not that I get better. It's not that I'm going further. It's that I'm actually getting weaker.
Right.
And I'm learning to play with this. So it's new in the same place. Anyway, it's kind of like what it's been like.
Yeah, no, it makes sense.
But it is scary all the same because tick-tock. And when they say when you go over the hill, downhill goes faster than uphill, it is so true. So now you're like speeding up the rate at which I'm not falling but degrading, the rate at which it moves. I said it to somebody else, and I said after a certain age, it's like dog years. 1 year for you is actually 10 years. It's actually 10 years worth of degrading. It goes so fast. Stuff that you could do last year, you just like, forget it. You can't jump that high anymore. What do you do now? And me, my mind, I'm like, no, I got to figure this out.
Yeah.
I know I can do it. I just got to, I got to go do these workouts. And if I do these workouts with these weights, I'll be able to do it. But there comes a point you just can't anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And what are you then? And so that's been like, for me, like the hardest part on the athletic side, because I love it. And, amongst the older guys, this is nothing to brag about, but amongst the older guys, they're like, oh man, you're so fast.
Yeah.
And I'm like, dude, it's because we're old.
It's relative.
Yeah, it's relative. Not against those guys, I'm not. So even now we're playing in the over 40 league, and you're like, oh, well, this is just like,
Yeah.
What is this? But it's letting go. And that for me is still something I got to work on. Just let go. And in letting go, it's not loss. In letting go, there's like gain. But that's a topic for another day. Yeah.
That's a good one, yeah.
I don't know. We'll talk more. But that's what I love about, like, when I talk to him, I see what I could have been if I put in the time. So I love him. Like, I talk to this guy. It's so like, not just, I don't want to use the word inspiring. I think it's more and maybe admiration's not even a strong enough word for me to use with Dylan. Like, I admire so much at such an age to, a lot of people will say, oh, I accomplished that, so look at me now. And then they're done. Because I did that. I was like, hey, look, I won locally, I'm done. But you don't do that. You keep going, and you keep finding new challenges for yourself. And you deliberately, intently look for something that puts you in the back of the pack, because you want to see how to figure out moving forward. And you use the pack not for relativity, but you use the pack for your development, is how I think you do it. You're not using the pack. I was using the pack sometimes to be like, this is where I rank.
Yeah.
Whereas you're using it for, this is how I can develop. And there's a big difference in that.
Yeah. So it's a puzzle to kind of work through. You know what I mean? It's kind of like, I've been getting into like the F1 shows, like on Netflix and everything too. And it's like, it's fun to be the guy at the front all the time. But then there's also, like, those aren't the highlights. The highlights are seeing the guy from the back, find his way through the field and like, overtake and whatever. And like, that's what people like to watch, not the guy who's just in front doing laps around everybody too. So like, there's a time to do that. But again, like, the challenge is from figuring out the gaps in between and, working through that field and whatever. But yeah, if you're just sticking to the thing that like you're the best at, like, you'll be great at that one thing, but then, you can't, again, close your eyes and pretend that there's not a million things that you're not good at. So might as well try your best to like develop those skills in other ways too. And like, enjoy being like a white belt again in certain things.
Yeah. Enjoy being a white belt. There's a line. Like when the white belts come in, they're like, they should hear you say that. Enjoy being a white belt.
Yeah. I'll never forget. They won't believe it.
Yeah, nobody would believe it, right?
They won't believe it. They're like, nah, you're just feeding me a line.
White belt? Look at the time that you have right now to like, look at all the growth potential you have, right?
Yeah.
How do you celebrate being a white belt? Nobody ever celebrates being a white belt, but that's a good point.
Well, I hated that. Like when I first started fighting and people would tell me like, oh, you're so good. Like, you just need more experience. Like, I would lose something and, oh, you just, you're good. You just need more experience. And for me, that was like, I hated hearing that, because I'm like, well, what do I do about that? Like, if you told me like my
you can't get that now.
Yeah, like if my back kick needed some work, like, okay, I can go to the gym and I can just drill it until I make it better, right? Like if my cardio was bad, I could like run or skip rope or whatever. What do you do when it's an experience thing? You know what I mean? So that used to piss me off, because it's like, you just need more experience. Like, that doesn't help me right now, right? So it's a patience thing too. So yeah, you can tell all these white belts, hey, this is a great time. You're gonna like learn so much and you're gonna enjoy learning. And it's like, yeah, like get me to where I want to be already. And it's just, I don't think you could package it as, you could package it like in the clearest, like most beautiful way. And I think it's never going to kind of register until after the fact. And then you look back on it. It's kind of like a retrospective type of thing.
Yeah, I wonder about that. That is true. But I don't think we say that to white belts very much.
I don't think it would matter. I don't think it would.
You don't think it would?
No, I think there would probably be a few that kind of take that as a way to like judge themselves less for like not being where they want to be. But I don't think anyone would really sit there and go, I love being a white belt, is okay, but I really want to be a yellow belt soon, or I really want to like get to that.
What I mean by that is that I know some, especially amongst the adults, the older students, because the struggle is so different.
Yeah.
They don't learn. We don't learn as fast. We don't make the moves the same way. So for them, someone saying to them that actually this here right now, these are big wins actually. Like when you get a lot more flexible, the struggle's past. This here, there's a lot of win in this. A lot of them, because if we don't do that, sometimes what happens is the morale level does drop. And when the morale level can drop, there can also be a quit moment. But if the person realizes before that moment that, hold on a second, there's a lot of advantage in this place, that there is something to be said about you're actively thinking, that's growth, right? That's a black belt moment, actually. That, right? You know what I'm saying? Like, you're getting better. That's a win. So it's taking longer. So what?
Yeah.
You will remember these days. Remember when you struggled with this pattern? Remember when yellow belt was a big deal to you? Like, you learn to appreciate things.
Yeah.
So I think, I mean, maybe the kids not so much, but definitely the adult athletes or people who are starting. Like a lot of people I talk to, I start out. I was talking to a parent just the other day, and he says, "Yeah, I don't know. For me, it might be too late." That's exactly the thought. For me, it might be too late to start. And they never even walk through that door.
Yeah.
Oh my God, this entire parallel universe is waiting, and they're just, yeah, it's too late for me. So they quit before they start because nobody said to them that, have you ever realized that the navigating as you move through is the fun part?
Yeah.
Going from the back of the pack through the pack. Oh yeah, that could be fun. There's a reason to do it. It's motivation.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's something that as you get older, you kind of appreciate more because maybe you haven't had that experience in sport, but like other things, it's like, being a student was tough, but then you look back and like, okay, but those were the fun parts, right? So you can kind of like think back to that. I think when you're doing it for the first time, when you're like a kid, early teenager or whatever, I just don't think you have enough like life experience to be able to, and again, this isn't everybody, but I think generally
I agree.
You can appreciate it more when you've at least seen it play out in other ways. Like for me, like I made a point to myself, and I haven't always kind of stuck to it, but I've tried, is like when I first started to get into business, I'm like, I'm going to try to appreciate all the small wins a little bit more because I never gave myself the space to do that when I was competing. Like I was always about the next thing. Okay, I won this thing, but that wasn't good enough. Like there's more to it. I don't want to settle. And like I didn't really kind of take in my accomplishments till at the very end, whereas I probably could have enjoyed the process a little bit more if I had just kind of given myself those pats on the back along the way, and that kind of using that experience from something totally different kind of led into the insights of, okay, this time I want to try to do what I didn't do, which is appreciate some of those smaller wins. But again, if I hadn't experienced it the first time, if you had just told me, hey man, in business, you're going to have highs and lows, like, even the lows are good, I'd be like, okay, like easy for you to say you're through it now. How do I know I'm going to get there? So there's a lot of like intuition that comes from doing it the first time and going through that journey to kind of trust yourself again. But it's tough to be like on your first time doing something, having those like wise thoughts come in and fully believing them, because there's always going to be a part of like, well, easy for you to say my story is different. And like, that's why I think you just kind of learn the most from yourself. So if whether it's in sport or life or business or relationships, whatever, like if you can find a pathway in which you started somewhere and you ended in a better place, like just use that as the proof that you need.
I almost don't want to stop recording sitting with this guy, eh? How much time are we okay? Like, I think we oh, they did. Oh, okay. So we've got more time. Cool. How are you doing?
I'm good.
You good?
Yeah.
How are you guys doing for time? We have a bit more?
Yeah, I'm just going to check with Master Farrow. I'm supposed to meet him.
Yeah.
You'll talk anything. You get to first meet so both call then
Yeah.
that idea where you approach anything like they're gonna get it. Because like when we get older, like you don't want to go through that.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, it is true. Like to actually intently seek, like deliberately seek out opportunities. Yeah. 100%. I've actually found myself saying that to people. So people are like, oh, let me show you how this works. I'm like, I actually don't. I don't want to know how it works. Could you just I don't want to sit there and fail on this thing and take forever. Can you just do it? So like 100%. But I think there's something to be said for, constantly, like, okay, for those who go out there to seek these moments, like you sought it out. You're like, okay, I want a different kind of challenge, right? Like I feel like I'm plateauing, right? But that doesn't happen most of the times. Most of the times, I think, like you got to the top, right, of a certain point. Most people don't get to the top. So, so you were like, okay, so what else is there? But most people, I feel, because they're constantly struggling to get to that top, and that top is relative to others. It's not their own journey. They're playing against others. They're not really even playing against themselves. So they constantly find themselves in this rut right? Like they're grinding. I'm like, what are you grinding? Who you comparing yourself to, right? But they're grinding, so they never feel like they get to the top. And when I talk to the guys who get to the top, quite often they're not even competing against the others either. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like you weren't often. I don't recall you often saying to yourself, I want to be better than that guy. You were just concentrating on yourself. It was always your game. The guys that get to the top usually sound like that. And the people that struggle to get to the top usually don't say that. They're usually judging themselves. They're comparing themselves to others. And so right there, that criteria that you talked about is what ultimately shifts. Now, because of that, you go to you go seeking out these other opportunities that make you better. Whereas they are sitting there not appreciating, if they could just appreciate that this moment right here, this is my win. But you call it a small win. That's my only exception that I take. I don't think those are small wins. I think those wins are pivotal wins. Like those are the wins that, it's like when you see, are we watching a basketball game and somebody misses the last shot and loses the game, right? And people look at that, oh, they missed the last shot that could have won the game. I'm like, that's not where the game was won and lost. There was 100 other shots that were taken before that were, why did they take that low percentage shot? Like they turned the ball over here. Like I look at all of that and I go, wait a second, that game did not depend on the last shot. That game depended on all the shots, right? So sometimes they made it, sometimes they didn't. But I look at all the shots and I'm like, there are shots being taken constantly in our day, right? In that tournament. And those shots could have gone either way.
Yeah.
But that one that like yesterday I was training, Monday I was training with the kid, like the class. And there was this, we were doing sprints. And we had 4 lines. The student in front of me, I trained with them. So the student in front of me was running against 3 other kids, and he was faster than the 3 other kids. So he wasn't running as hard on the sprint.
Mm-hmm.
He was like literally jogging, but he was still ahead of them. And I could tell he wasn't really exerting himself. And I was like, dude, it doesn't matter how fast the other 3 are. You gotta run your hardest. That's the purpose of the exercise. And there's something I've heard recently said that really stuck with me that said, you can't change your future. You can change your habits, and your habits change your future. You know what I mean? Change your habits changes your future. You're talking about changing the criteria.
Yeah.
A lot of people get hung up on like that goal, that first place. And it's like, hold on a second. No, actually, that's just like the last thing that happens.
Yeah.
The wins are here. Do you feel that? Like, what do you think of that?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few things that you said that were interesting. I mean, even going back to the whole basketball analogy, you said, it's not won and lost here, right? I think the bigger thing that needs to be thought of too is like usually the evaluation goes in after the loss, right?
Yeah.
People are a lot quicker to, deep dive into film and whatever after a loss happens, or if you like make a strategic error, really go back in the drawing board, like why did this happen? Whereas when things like perceived wins happen, it's less about that, it's more about let's celebrate, But like you said, what if that game-winning shot went in, right? Let's look at it from the other perspective. Game-winning shot went in, great, everybody's celebrating. But now all those little micro things that did go wrong that had to leave it up to one shot to decide it, you're not really even getting to the bottom of because you're all in like kind of the celebration mode that you're not evaluating. So like, I think that's a whole other thing too, is like you always want to be evaluating no matter what. And not have that in relation to whether things are going well or not well, because you could have a huge streak of things seemingly going well, but there could be things behind the scenes that could be fixed and improved on. But if you're just kind of celebrating it because things are great, there's going to be a time where it's not. And if you had gone back and evaluated, you would have known that by now, right? So there's like a tendency to like celebrate and like look at the highlights when you win. Like I remember I would love to, like if I won a fight, like watch the highlights over and over again. But it's like by me only watching the highlights, I'm leaving myself vulnerable now because I'm not watching all of the things that weren't highlights that still could be fixed. Whereas if I lost, that's when I would go deep into film and I would spend hours like breaking it down and looking at it. When did I do this? When did I make this motion? Should I have fake? Should I move right or left? Like going way deep into that rabbit hole during a loss. Whereas a win, it's like, okay, let's look at the highlights again. But there's so much still to be seen. So I think that's also kind of a framework too, is it's like people are a lot quicker to evaluate when things go wrong because it makes sense to, but we kind of should use that same standard even when things are going right, because there's always little things to make improvements on.
So that's you talked about putting in the reps, right? Just a lot of repping. And we talk about habit building, and that's what they say, like successful people have success habits, right? So success habits, you have a great success habit of, for example, constantly, looking at ways for learning and developing, and you intently put yourself into these situations where, I gotta develop because I'm back here now, and you find ways to do that. But it's like sometimes I find myself, I don't know if you found this as well. Like I'll play some team sports, and I'll you notice like in a game, when a team is down with 2 minutes left, all of a sudden, the intensity level, well, even as an athlete, you're down to like the last 30 seconds, you're down by 2 points. All of a sudden you raise the game. Something happens. You're like, that's why I always say, MK, play like you're down one. I always say I'm best when I'm down one. Like, even when I'm up two, I'm like, I'm down one. Because I never want to lose that, that intensity. So I'm like, until it's over, then, okay? But I feel like I look at people generally and I go, why is it that you got to wait until you're down? Like you just said. Why not just bring the game, play every minute like it's your last minute? And if we play every minute like it's our last minute, we'll summon the energy, we'll summon the will. Like, you're down two, it's the end of the game. Tell me, are you not your most tired self at that point? You are, but you found it. You dug, you found it. It's just like that. You go, you will it, right? They will it. Well, why don't you just will it all the time?
Yeah.
Or I'll see somebody like running at a ball and he's kind of jogging. And I'm like, and then the opponent starts coming closer to the ball.
Yeah, and then they
and then they start sprinting, and then they miss it by half a step. And I'm like, how about you sprint first, jog later? And I would notice, like, I would get like really, harsh, right? I would be harsh, and I'd be like, well, and then not only would I say that, I go, this is why you have the life that you have. This explains your life. And, I'd be like, and I'm like, go easy. But I was like, yeah, that's your microcosm of why you feel like you're average. You're not average.
Yeah.
You're playing average. Like you stop playing average then. I know somebody once came to me once and said the same thing. It's like, you just got to swing harder. And I'm like, what do you mean swing harder? Just swing harder. Okay. Yeah. Like it wasn't a matter of, you don't have the circumstance, you don't have the power, you don't have the speed. You have it. Just stop settling. Like, and we why does that happen? It's hard to ask you that because you're not like that. But you ever see that in people that you try to bring that out of them?
Yeah, I think,
what is it?
Why it comes down to like just the simplest of questions of, you can either be proactive or reactive. That's it. Right. Like you said, when you're jogging to the ball and then someone catches up and that makes you speed up, you're reacting to that person. Right. If you're always, and this isn't just in sport, it's there's layers to it, right? There's like on a personal level and interpersonal level, like just in life itself. Like if you're always going to be reacting, you're always putting yourself kind of not in the driver's seat, you're in the passenger seat because you're just reacting to what's given to you, right? Something happens in your day, it messes you up. Okay, well, if I'm now frustrated and my whole day's ruined because something got canceled, I'm reacting to the situation instead of being proactive and saying, well, here's what else I can do, right? Like you said, when you're doing your sprints, just because you're faster than the person beside you, it doesn't mean that you can now, relative to them, do just enough to get by because now I'm reacting, right? It's about being proactive and just bringing your best to the table despite whatever's going on, and then using that as the benchmark. It's the same thing with like confidence, right? Do you go in and you just react and say, well, based off the game I'm playing, my confidence can be high or low, right? At halftime, my confidence is dependent on how many points I have. Or What if you flip it and you say, well, if I'm confident first and I bring confidence with me and I have good body language and I'm communicating well and I'm acting the part and being confident first and I'm proactive about that, well, my play could in theory then react to that and I'll do better, right? So I think really like that point you're making really just gets summed up into you can be proactive, you can be reactive, both are fine, but one of them is going to get you a lot closer to where you want to be.
I love that. Would you do you want to be a passenger or do you want to drive?
Mm-hmm.
If it's your car, if it's your destination, would you rather be a passenger? How are you going to get there? You're going to get there by being a passenger? Or are you going to get there by driving? I think that's really good to for people to realize that, they say like take control of it, be proactive and drive. drive your life, man, instead of being a passenger in your, I think that's it. Like people give up that call it power, or they just sort of like, they're better than me, and like to your point, like, well, what good's that going to do you, right? So how are you going to be able to move yourself forward? And like you say, if you stay here, if you try, you may fail, but if you stay here, you're failing already.
Yeah.
So at least, but that's the other thing I notice sometimes is like, again, I'll use this in soccer because I hear this sometimes is like, oh man, it's cold or it's raining. And they're thinking, dude, that weather that's for us is the same weather that's for them.
Yeah.
Like it's cold for everybody. It's raining for everybody. So the one who wins is, forget the weather, just play the game.
Yep.
But we get caught up in the circumstances and then how it's unfair or how, like the circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
And we use the circumstances as like, it's almost like we're setting up our excuses.
Yeah.
Do you feel that?
Mm-hmm. It's easy. Yeah, it's easy to go into the whole like, but you kind of like set the tone. You set the foundation so that if it doesn't go my way, I can say this. Like I
got a reason.
I forgot my real shoes in the back, so I'm wearing my beat up ones today. I don't know if I'll be as quick, or like my grip on this turf isn't as good as usual. So you're kind of setting yourself up so that if it goes wrong, everybody already knows, right? Or it's like, I see it all the time. I'm trying to think of another example, but people walk in, right, and they're like, oh, it's, they'll just open it with something like that.
Yeah.
Right? They're just opening it with, like they're leaving the door open.
Oh, last night I went to sleep at like...
Yeah, and it's just like, again...
I got no sleep last night, yeah.
Yeah, it's a safety thing so that,
Is it a safety thing?
I think
Do you think
so.
that actually helps them, though? Or do you think that that's just already setting themselves up for like an expectation of failure?
It's a good question. Yeah, I think it's perceived as a safety thing, but as a byproduct of that, you're not setting the right tone for something to go in your favor. If you're already walking in saying, okay, but right, this could happen. It's like, yeah, it could happen.
I've got my excuses ready.
Exactly. And then
does a winner come in with excuses like ready? Come on. What are you telling yourself at that point?
Yeah, when you look at like champions at a high level, you always hear those stories afterwards, not before, right? Like I'll watch UFC sometimes and I'll see like, a big title defense and they'll win, and then you'll hear afterwards, they had to spend, last night in the ER because of something, or they broke their wrist 2 weeks ago, and you hear it afterwards.
Yeah, they have it too. Yeah.
But it's not, they could have easily said, before the fight in some of the interviews, I'm recovering, I kind of, I pulled my hamstring last month, I'm slowly getting back into it, and then from there, you're kind of setting the tone like, okay, if I lose, that's why, right? So when you look at people at a high level, all that information comes out afterwards. You would look at them, you'd think everything was perfect, but you don't know behind the scenes how much of a mess is going on.
That happens in life too. Like, people are like, oh, well, that kid, that guy comes from money.
Exactly.
They had money. They had this. I don't have this. I don't have this. I don't have that. And those are, I don't know, kind of excuses.
Mm-hmm.
What do you say to somebody, because they're like, well, it's almost like they looked at the whole formula already and they figured out the balance to it.
Yeah.
And they figured that where they are now, that's the formula that explains where they are now.
Yeah.
Instead of looking at it and saying, hold on a second, this formula doesn't balance because my X does not fit into this result. It does not fit here. But what we do, I think sometimes, is by coming up with those excuses, is we make that formula make sense now.
Yeah.
Oh, I lost because. Instead of saying, hold on a second, in spite of that, I still don't belong here. I should, I ought to, I have it in me. I see things in formulas like that.
Yeah.
And I feel like all these things that we talk about are variables in the formula. So I like that. Like, to me, in my mind, it's a way to kind of keep it, to be able to then use that in different scenarios, whether it's sports, whether it's business, whether it's anything. It's like, hold on, here are the variables. But when then I realize is like, and this could be A, this could be B, but when A is this, then my X has to be this.
Yeah.
So I, like, when I'm talking to like my leaders, I sort of say to them, I go, what X do you have to be for this to equal what you want? Not what it is now. So if it equals right now 1, what X do you have to be to make it equal 2? The circumstances are what they are. What are you going to change inside of you that you control to be able to change what's on the other side of that equal sign? You're on this side of the equal sign. And we use these excuses or these variables to explain why what's on the other side of that equal sign is what it is. But what we're failing at that moment to realize is, hold on a second, I can change what I am. You talk about the criteria. I can change my X to change what happens on the other side.
Yeah.
Even if all of these excuses were there, even if all of these other variables were the same or worse. And then I guess the question is like, how they get to see themselves as changing that criteria.
Yeah.
Changing the criteria in the middle of a game, in the middle of the fight. Yeah, you ever had to do that? Like, you go in there with a plan, it's not working. You quickly, then and there, have to say, change the criteria.
Yeah.
You ever had that happen?
Yeah.
Yeah,
For
okay.
sure,
Really?
For sure.
Like
Yeah,
when?
yeah.
Like, it's happened?
On the next episode.
Oh, no,
talk about it.
we're going to tell that.
Yeah.
Changing the criteria midway.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah. No, sorry.
Let's do
Master
that.
Fair has been texting me.
All right.
Yeah.
All right.
Sorry.
I think we've got...
I want to stand them up.
Well, now that we know that you're here in town, we're going to do this again. How's that sound, guys?